Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy. Today we're running through my top 30 running back rankings for week 2 of the fantasy football season, basically covering each and every matchup, telling you which running backs you should start or sit this week. Guys, if you do enjoy today's video, would really appreciate it if you did hit that like button to let me know you enjoy this content coming from us, and hit that subscribe button down below. Today's video is brought to you by The Stunt. I've got a short video to tell you what they are all about.
Social media is such a crowded space these days. If you're looking for sports content on the latest news, advice, or hell, even entertainment, it can be cluttered by content you don't actually want to see. That's where The Stunt comes in. They've taken all the elements of your favorite social media apps, brought it to one place, and made it about the one thing we love most: sports. Stunt was founded by the creator of YouTube TV at Google, so the design is eye-popping and the navigation is simple. Check out the latest takes, sparks, and live rooms from us and other content creators like Trey Wingo and Michael Irvin. Don't just follow sports, be a part of the conversation. Download the Stunt app today.
And guys, each and every week we'll be live on The Stunt, 4 p.m. on Fridays. I'll be answering each and every one of your start and sit questions at any position. So if you're dropping them in the comments down below, don't waste your time. Probably not going to reply, but I will on Friday, 4 p.m. We'll be live on there. So go download the app. The link is down below in the description. And then as well, make sure you're following OwnersBox on there so you get notified when we do go live. And I will include the links in the description and as well in the pinned comments. All right, our RB1 on the week is Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers, a matchup with the Rams. San Francisco team that has dominated the Rams in recent years. If you do remember these matchups between these two teams, McCaffrey, opportunities are there. Really good volume, obviously a really good receiving profile as well. He looked great in week 1. I expect that to continue. RB2 on the week, Derrick Henry. The Chargers looked a little bit better against the run in week 1, which is a good sign for them as a team, but a matchup with Derrick Henry and the Titans is going to lead to far more volume than Raheem Mostert and the Dolphins. This is a team that was 27th in fantasy points allowed to running backs last season and ranked 30th in EPA. So this is a team that I don't think will continue to be great against the run. Just the way that they play defensively and the scheme that they have doesn't lend itself too well to stopping the run. So expect Henry to have a huge week. At 3 is Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb has a matchup with the Steelers, who are missing Cameron Hayward. He's out for an extended period having surgery. Was surprised to see that come over the wire last night and into this morning. The Steelers are pretty middling run defense. They were top 10 in EPA. They were 15th in fantasy points against the run last season. I'm going off of last year's numbers with a little bit of note on this past year, just because I think that information is a little bit more valuable, but eventually we'll start going off the numbers for this year. At 4 is Saquon Barkley, a matchup with the Arizona Cardinals. Definitely one that I like here for the Giants, getting back into a more likely, at the very least, neutral, but more than likely positive game script against a Cardinals team that is lacking talent. They were 30th in fantasy points allowed to running backs last season. Saquon should get the ball a ton. I don't expect the same game script that we saw against the Cowboys on Sunday night. At 5 is Tony Pollard. Pollard in a matchup with the New York Jets. Now, the Jets are a solid run defense. They look good against the Bills in week 1. They were 8th in fantasy points allowed to running backs last season, 13th in EPA. So this is a good group, but I do expect this Jets team to struggle to put up points offensively, and I don't think that the Cowboys will take a lot of chances throwing the ball against this Jets secondary. So Pollard, who very much looks to see a very significant role in this offense. We didn't see Deuce Vaughn at all until the game was basically over. We saw Kevontae Turpin and Dowdle a little bit, but very little bit. So Pollard's in line for just all of these opportunities. At 6 is Aaron Jones. Love the week he had last week. A lot of people were shocked that he was in my top 12. Definitely a good matchup. Another good matchup here against the Falcons. The Falcons were 19th in fantasy points allowed to running backs last year, but were actually 27th in EPA. So weren't that good of a group. And I thought Sanders and Hubbard ran well from the Panthers against Atlanta last week. I expect more of the same from Jones here. And I expect Jones' volume to increase even further because the Falcons could draw up a little bit more pressure against Jordan Love, and A.J. Dillon was just absolutely horrendous last week. Jones should be getting the ball far more. I know they want to protect him. They don't want to use him too much considering his age and considering they have another option. I expect Jones to have more rushing attempts than Dillon this week because last week it was not the case. So like Jones this week. At 7 is Kenneth Walker. Walker looked really, really good. I know that the Seahawks were obviously trailing in that game. They couldn't give him the ball as much. I thought he looked very explosive. Didn't look to be riddled by injury whatsoever. Charbonnet wasn't on the field too much. We saw as well Walker getting a ton of opportunities in the receiving game. He's got a matchup with Detroit, and I thought the Chiefs were a team that were brutal running the ball against Detroit. So it keeps me from wanting to put Walker into like a top 5 guy, but I love the volume, love the opportunity. Hopefully a more neutral game script here, and I think Walker is just a dynamic talent, so I really like him. At 8 is Austin Eckler. Eckler obviously dealing with an injury. There is the potential of him not playing on Sunday. If he doesn't play, I'm not that excited to start Joshua Kelly. He's definitely someone that would be probably like in my RB20 area, but for Eckler, we know his reliability as a receiver because this matchup with the Titans is a tough one. 2nd in fantasy points allowed to running backs last season. Jamal Williams did absolutely nothing nothing in week 1 against this Titans run defense. Eckler, as long as he gets the receiving volume, which we saw was pretty decent last week, he should continue to be a top 12 guy that you can play even with the injury. At 9 is Bijan Robinson, a matchup with the Packers team that did look good against the run against the Bears, which was surprising, but led the team in targets last week, Bijan Robinson, and was more efficient than Tyler Algier on the ground, although he didn't get as many rushing opportunities. I love what he's doing as a receiver. I think he looks explosive. He looks as good as I anticipated him to look in the NFL, and this is a Packers team that ranked 25th in fantasy points allowed to running backs last season and 28th in EPA against the run, so struggled against the run last year, so Bijan has a great matchup too. 10 is Josh Jacobs. The Bills were susceptible to some explosive plays against the Jets last week, so that could be the case for Jacobs, who had a really bad first week against the Broncos, averaged 2.5 yards per carry. Opportunity to bounce back here. The Bills were a pretty good run defense last season, but they did rank 26th in run defense grade from PFF, so there were some struggles, explosive plays given up like we saw in week 1. So I think Jacobs is into another opportunity here where he can bounce back from last week. Still a guy you want to play because the volume is still definitely there. We didn't see Zamir White much at all. At 11 is Travis Etienne, a matchup with Kansas City, a good one for a receiving running back. Kansas City gave up the most receptions to running backs last season. How does Tank Bigsby's couple mistakes there, especially the late game one, affect his usage going into this week? That will be telling as well and could benefit Etienne for sure against this Kansas City run defense. That does get Chris Jones back, but definitely still like Etienne as the volume's still there. He's still the number 1 guy right now and is a top 12 guy in my mind. At 12, seems to be a player I'm much higher on than the consensus heading into this week, James Conner. I mean, the matchup is solid. We got the Giants, 29th in fantasy points allowed to running backs last season, 29th in EPA, 28th in run defense grade. This is a guy who had 19 touches last week. Didn't do a whole hell of a lot, but was involved in a receiving game. This team won't be able to throw the ball effectively basically against anyone with Josh Dobbs as their quarterback. James Conner will be relied on heavily. I bet you he gets into the 20s for sure in touches, and we know what he can do when they get the opportunities inside the 5 too. So I definitely think Conner's an excellent start this week. 13, David Montgomery. Montgomery in a matchup against Seattle. Seattle looked pretty decent against the run last week, actually really good against the Rams. I don't know if that's completely the case for them going into the rest of the season. They did really struggle last year. They were a team that was 25th in EPA against the run, and for Montgomery, we know he's going to be getting those valuable opportunities to score points, which Seattle can give up some points, and this Detroit offense is moving the ball well. 14, Najee Harris. The Browns looked pretty good against the run last week, but they were a team that struggled a lot last year, so I'm not completely sold that they'll be as good of a unit week in and week out. The Bengals have historically not been able to run the ball all that well, and I know Matt Canada wants to run the football. He couldn't do it last week against the 49ers run defense. He can do it against the Browns. Harris was really good to close out the year because of those opportunities. We saw Warren get on the field a bit, but I expect Harris to still be the number 1, so definitely can start him confidently this week. At 15 is James Cook. Cook has a matchup with the Raiders. The Raiders were okay against the run last week against Denver. Pretty solid. No explosive plays really, but for Cook, love his share. 66% share of the rushing attempts. Ran 25 routes as well. He's doing everything I anticipated. To me in this offense, he's going to consistently be in this tier for me as a solid RB2. At 16 is Breece Hall. Man, Hall looked really good. One of those guys that seems to be flipping the narrative on guys coming back from an ACL injury. He was way better than Dalvin Cook. He had 5 missed tackles forced on just 10 carries, making guys miss just like he was last season. Again, the Jets with Zach Wilson at quarterback against the Cowboys defense. I expect them to run the ball quite a bit, and I expect Hall, with him looking as good as he did last week, to continue to do so and potentially have that edge over Dalvin Cook in touches that he didn't have last week, he could have this week. Not to say he's going to take over. If he was taken over completely, he'd be higher in my rankings, but because Dalvin Cook will still have a share here, this is where I've got him slotted. At 17 is Tyler Algier. Algier and Bijan are both great starts this week against the Packers defense. Algier looked pretty solid last week against Carolina as well. He had 15 carries to Bijan's 10, and he also had 3 inside the 5 carries to Bijan's 0. So that makes things very valuable for this team, or for Algier on the offensive side here, because of course the Falcons offense in the passing game looks brutal with Desmond Ridder at QB, but they'll run the ball well, and when they get inside the 5, it looks like Tyler Algier will be that guy, so scoring opportunities will be plenty for Algier this week. Definitely start him. I know a couple people were telling me that they were able to add him off the wire. Hopefully if you did, you spent a good amount of fab, because he's definitely very valuable right now. At 18 is Joe Mixon. Tough matchup with the Ravens, but I definitely like the Bengals to bounce back in this game. The Ravens are down Marcus Williams, Ronnie Stanley, Tyler Linderbaum. We saw J.K. Dobbins out for the year as well. So a lot of injuries. I think the Bengals handle this game. That'll give Mixon some volume. Chris Evans struggled in pass blocking as well, which is why Mixon was feared to not be on the field field as much as like last season was a problem with Perine stepping in because of Mixon's struggles as a pass blocker, but he was better than Evans and he was on the field quite a bit too. So like the opportunities there for Mixon. 19 is Dameon Pierce. Pierce is going into a matchup with the Colts. The Colts are a team that were not great against the run against Jacksonville. They were a team that was pretty middle of the road, 23rd in fantasy points allowed. I think this is a Houston team that could compete in this game as well. 22-6 advantage on passing snaps for Dameon Pierce. So he's on the field in the passing game. Devin Singletary really struggled as a rusher last week too. Pierce wasn't good either, but I expect Pierce to have a pretty good hold on this spot here in pretty much 3-down situations. More neutral matchup. I think Pierce will be a solid start this week, but again, not too high because their Texans offense didn't look great in week 1. 20 is Ramondre Stevenson. Zeke was on the field a pretty good amount. Stevenson saved his week with his receptions late in the game to be able to keep himself above water, especially in PPR formats. Got a matchup with Miami. Miami last year was a pretty good run defense, 14th in EPA, 5th in run defense grade. But with Vic Fangio calling plays now, the defense changes quite a bit in their personnel and their scheme. I think it'll allow for Stevenson to be a little bit more efficient because Philly was very good against the run with the changes they made throughout the offseason. So a better matchup here against Miami. So I think Stevenson will be a serviceable start against this Miami team here too. 21, Rachaad White. I talked about this last week. I did not like White in the matchup with Minnesota. He was not good. Didn't see a lot of receiving volume. Didn't run efficiently. We've got a much better opportunity for this matchup here against Chicago, who was solid against the run. They only give up 3 yards per carry against Green Bay. I don't know if that'll be a week in, week out occurrence, but that's why I have White here because I do think Chicago is much better in their linebacker core. So I do think it won't be easy sledding for White, but a matchup where they could potentially be in a more positive game script against a Chicago team. I like Chicago in this game. I will tell you that, but one where if you drafted White, I mean, there's just no way you're not starting him if you drafted this guy with this matchup. 22 is Alexander Mattison. Look, Madison's getting all those opportunities in this Vikings offense, but Philly looks legitimately improved with Carter and Davis in the middle of their defense. The two of them and Nakobe Dean, the 3 Georgia guys, actually led the team in run defense grade last week against the Patriots. Were really good against the run against the Patriots. I don't think that's going to change. The Eagles are 7-point favorites. Madison's got to save his week in the receiving game here, which he could potentially do, but that's why I have him in more of my back-end RB2 tier. 23 is Kenneth Gainwell. Gainwell is banged up. He hasn't been practicing heading into the Thursday night matchup. Maybe he doesn't play. If he doesn't play, DeAndre Swift will likely be the RB1, but I would have him a few spots lower in my rankings because I do think Boston Scott could kick into some of these rushing attempts inside the 5. Rashad Penny might be active as well. That could impact Swift's usage, but if Gainwell is healthy, he is going to be the number 1 option for this offense, getting the inside the 5 carries. Minnesota is a team that does not scare me whatsoever defensively, so potentially an intriguing start there. Close out my top 24. Miles Sanders, New Orleans. Sanders was getting the lion's share of opportunities. If I'm looking at my numbers here, he had an 18-9 advantage in rushing attempts and 24-18 routes. So Hubbard is eating into his opportunities a pretty decent amount. That's why Sanders isn't a guy right now I'm incredibly high on. New Orleans is like an okay matchup, 20th in EPA, 13th in fantasy points allowed to running backs last year. So okay guy to play, not one I'm expecting a lot from with this share. This will probably be a low-scoring game in my opinion. 25, probably waiting to hear what I think of him. Jahmyr Gibbs, coming off the pretty brutal week last week, looked really good when he was on the field, just wasn't on the field. I'm not going to take anything this Lions staff says about him seriously. To be honest, I'm just not going to believe anything they say. I'm going to wait till I see it. Gibbs is a guy you could start. I think his role will probably increase a little bit this week because he did look really good. He was more efficient than David Montgomery, forced some missed tackles as well. And the matchup here with Seattle is pretty positive. So I'm not afraid to start him. I want you guys to lower expectations until we actually see it on the field as opposed to the discussions off of it. 26 is Isaiah Pacheco. The share here is just so ugly. 19-16-8. So that was Pacheco, McKinnon, and CH. That was the routes run. So Pacheco had the advantage there, which is great to see. We didn't see that last year. He's running more routes than a guy like Jerick McKinnon, which is great. 8-6 advantage over Clyde Edwards-Helaire in rushing attempts. I mean, Jacksonville can be a pretty good matchup. They look good against the Colts, to be honest, against the run. And Pacheco wasn't very efficient against the Lions either. You can play him. I think he's probably a decent start, but not one I'm too excited to play. 27 is Jamal Williams. I was way off Williams last week. Didn't want to start him whatsoever. He was brutal, but the volume was, of course, there. He had like 18 rushing attempts. He was brutal running the ball, but Carolina didn't look good against the run against Atlanta, gave up 5 yards per carry. So a guy can start with some confidence in the flex spot is what I'll say. 28, Brian Robinson. I was shocked to see Robinson had an even split with Antonio Gibson in routes run. Gibson just falling way back here in terms of his share of this offense. Denver's not a great matchup. They were pretty good against the run against the Raiders, but last year they were a team that you definitely wanted to run the ball on more than you wanted to throw it. And with Sam Howell's tough performance in week 1, I could see Robinson getting some decent volume here. 29, Javonte Williams. Washington's that nightmare matchup for any running back. I'm very low on Williams this week as my RB 29. It was good to see him on the field, but he had an exactly even split with Samaje Perine in snaps. So maybe he gets a few more this week, but this is a Washington team that's really, really solid. Javonte will have to do his damage more in the receiving game than in the running game, but the opportunity should still be there that he could, you can live with playing him. At 30 is Raheem Mostert. This is a guy who will be the number one option for the Miami Dolphins, but this is a matchup with New England where they were really good against running backs, 3rd in fantasy points allowed last season, 5th in EPA against the run. So I think Mostert's volume will be down a little bit. We won't be able to get the plus matchup with the Chargers. But again, if they score any if they're in the red zone inside the 5, like Miami's going to run the ball a little bit more because they don't really have, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle aren't excellent guys when it comes to being monsters in the end zone as guys that can, potentially throw those fade balls to. We saw Tyreek catch one last week, but that's not a typical thing. So Mostert always has that touchdown potential as well. Those are the top 30. Some of the guys that have just missed for me, Kyron Williams, Dalvin Cook, and Samaje Perine are just out. Guys I'm definitely not looking to start, an AJ Dillon, a Cam Akers, Gus Edwards, even Roschon Johnson, who looks to have the share with Chicago. Those are guys I'm still not looking to play this week. I would avoid to start. They're outside my top 30 pretty firmly. So those are the top 30 guys this week. Again, if you guys have any questions on some of these players or players I didn't talk about, feel free to drop those in the comments. But if you're looking for start sit advice on specific matchups this week, Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern, I'll be live on the stunt answering all of your questions. You can get into the live room, drop your questions in the chat, or step up on stage and ask your questions to me. So happy to answer them there. That link will again be down below in the description and in the pinned comments. So come join us there on the stunt. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you on the next one.